Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show where we talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Riverdale. Now, before I really get into the review and everything like that, do note, you might be wondering, am I going to be covering Deadly Class? And yes, I will be. Obviously, going forward, it will be, packaged together with the Riverdale reviews. The only reason why it's not happening is because I already reviewed the first episode of Deadly Class back when they originally, they released it early online a little while back. So I'll include a link to it in the description down below if you're curious. But going forward, Riverdale and Deadly Class will be packaged together, just in case you were curious. It's kind of a little housekeeping right off the top. But nevertheless, getting into the episode, a lot of interesting things that went down this episode, so let's break it down. So it's interesting because it seems like basically that quarantine was only 5 weeks, which is interesting. I think it's kind of an interesting choice they made. Instead of us really dealing with the quarantine, we deal with the aftermath and kind of see what state it kind of left Riverdale in. Things have kind of changed a little bit. Like as Jug was saying, it's kind of a shell of its former self. Kind of all these rules and guidelines around crime rates have gone up. In particular, we see like Cheryl and Tony are stealing, which is interesting. Because it was something that immediately crossed my mind with everything that kind of goes down in the episode. Cheryl is kind of secure in the fact of the matter is she comes from a well-off family. She never has to steal. She can get whatever she wants. Yeah, she has family issues and stuff like that, but she comes from a very well-off place. That's even something Jug was kind of throwing in her face later on, being like, the fact of the matter is getting pretty cold out here, but the fact of the matter is you could go back to Thistle House at any point in time, meaning you have somewhere else you can go. We're not that fortunate. This is where we stand, and this is all we have. The Serpent's not having the money to do what they need to do, but it's like you have the luxury that you can steal and stuff like that. You don't even have to do it for survival. You do it just for kicks. Now, Tony, on the other hand, she would have to fight and steal to survive. But so for me, it almost seems, I don't know, a little weird and messed up that the fact is you would do that, considering you don't need to do it. I mean, but to be fair, Cheryl's always kind of been, how would I put, a thrill seeker in a certain regard. But I think it also stems from the fact is, because yes, Tony would have to fight for survival, but it's also like, you're with me, so you never have to worry about another thing in your life. Like, as long as we're together, I guess maybe that's how Cheryl kind of justified. Because I looking at it from a different point of view, I'm like, it kind of seems like it's kind of messed up, because even if you did get caught, you have the money and power and position that you wouldn't suffer any ramifications, but Tony would. I mean, that exact scenario might be something we see kind of pop up later on, and that might end up causing a divide between Cheryl and Tony, because they're like all on it together, they're doing a little cat burgling thing and everything like that. But the moment things go potentially sideways, it kind of might go back to showing like, oh wait, we're from two different worlds, and that things aren't going to work the way we kind of hoped they would. We were caught up in our fantasy and our love for each other that we kind of didn't see the bigger picture of just like the different lives that we come from and stuff like that. That's my thought process behind that, but we'll see whether or not anything comes from that. But it is interesting because Jughead as well as Betty kind of have their are kind of carrying heavy burdens. Betty's taking care of all the kids from the Sisters of Quiet Mercy. They're kind of clinging on to her. Like, she's trying to avoid sending them to the farm because she doesn't trust them. You have Polly, Evelyn, as well as Alice kind of telling her, like, no, send them to the farm. They'll be taken care of and stuff like that. But once again, like I said, Betty doesn't trust the farm. And then there's the whole situation of like, oh, the Sisters of Quiet Mercy are not going to testify against Hiram. They're actually taking a vow of silence, and because it falls under religion, you can't really force them, until it comes out later on. It's like, oh yeah, they haven't been nuns for like 60 years because they were kind of cast out from the church because of their cruel treatments towards people. So they don't have that religious freedom of vow, and it's like, no, you have to answer it. You're not protected under that because technically you're not part of the church, so you technically don't fall under the purview of a nun. So that's kind of an interesting technicality in that whole situation, because I was wondering how they were going to go about all of that. And then there's problems with the kids, because one guy was still getting Fizzle Rock, and he got it from Fang, and Fang started selling, because for Fang it's like, no, I need to support my family, in particular his mom who's sick, and they're not getting enough income, so it's like, oh, let's sell drugs to compensate for that. Because it's also like everyone is holding this against Jug too, in a regard, because Jug wasn't around. He was busy helping Archie. But it's like, as a king, his loyalty to his people comes first more than Jug. I mean, Archie. I mean, because technically Archie is kind of like a serpent. I mean, he's not officially one. He's kind of like, the whole tattoo was meant to obviously keep him safe while he was in juvie and stuff like that. But it is a situation of like, he's serpent adjacent, but I guess that's not enough. Like, he's a brother, sure, but he's not as much of a brother as like a brother and sister as the other serpents are to Jug. It's like, you're the king, so they come first before even Archie, even if it's your best friend, even if it's your brother, you know. So that's kind of interesting. And, you know, even Cheryl and Tony kind of throw that against him, because later on he's trying to make this decision because they break into Hiram's place. Because once again, that plays into what I was talking about, the thrills of it. It's like, not only did you do it, because it's like, yes, you're stealing here and there, but you never made it obvious. You made it a point to let Hiram know it was you. I mean, he literally saw the lipstick and he was like, oh, I'm pretty sure it was Cheryl who did it. And that's not good, because it is that thing, once again, it's like, that's going to all come back on us. We will suffer the ramifications. Once again, you have somewhere else you can go. Like, let's not forget what Hiram did last season. He was buying up all that property, trying to take, I mean, he literally took homes away from the serpents and everything like that. But what do you have? You have money and power. And once again, like, that's that whole situation of like, you're in a privileged position to do whatever you want to. The serpents, we're not in that same case, you know? So, like I said, I'm interested to see if it ends up turning back around. But, you know, because of the stealing and stuff like that, because it wasn't just the steal, well, it was the stealing because it was like, for one, no crimes. I told you no more of that stuff. Like, the moment I laid out that guideline, you should have stopped, but you didn't. But then on top of that, you also did it to Hiram, and you made it a point to point it towards yourself, and that would have come back to us. But then they're like, oh, how dare you be a hypocrite because you didn't kick out Fang. And ultimately, Jughead had to make the decision of like, okay, he had to cut ties with Fang too, just to prove a point that like, hey, as a king, it's like, if I'm gonna I have to be fair. I made that choice, and you guys you're right. If I'm gonna kick you out, I have to kick him out as well. So now I'm interested to see what ends up happening with that Fang situation, because later on they're like, okay, Fang, we want you to go undercover. And he's like, it'd be my honor. The fact of the matter is, part of me is like, I was halfway expecting, like, when they stopped the Gargoyle gang later on in the episode, when they were defending Reggie and stuff like that, well, in particular defending Veronica's cargo, because they kind of work for her now. I was like, that was kind of a nice tie-in of like, oh, making it like that. I mean, it's like, you need bodyguards and everything like that, and they need the money. So, I mean, also, it's them going up against Hiram, so it's kind of like even more reason to take the job anyway. But nevertheless, I was expecting that last gargoyle, they take off the mask and it turns out to be Fang, because I figured like Fang will be strapped for cash, so he's going to, you know, he needs to take care of his mom, so I figured he'd do whatever it takes, even going with the serpents. I mean, going against the serpents and going with the gargoyles, especially now that he got kicked out. But like, even him being like, I'll do it, sure. The fact of the matter is, I don't know. I feel like there's going to be a switch with Fang. Either he's going to let Hiram know everything that he's up to, like he's actually going to be a double agent where the serpent thinks he's in there for their support, but in actuality he's actually going to help Hiram, or maybe Hiram's going to figure him out and then eventually go like, hey, and then actually convince him to work for him. I don't know. You just know it's not going to work out for the serpents forever. Like, things are looking good in their favor now and everything, you know, because they're like, yeah, Riverdale isn't kind of taken down. It's still got fight left in it, that they're here to keep fighting. They also bring up the whole point of like, there still not being officially a sheriff. I'm wondering what's going to end up happening about that. I mean, because I did forget, it's like, well, Sheriff Keller could always go back to picking up his position. I mean, he kind of got pushed out of office and everything like that, but this might be the time to kind of put him back in office, someone in a position where people can kind of trust. Like, yeah, people had their hesitations because of everything going on with the Black Hood, but, you know, with everything going on now, maybe people might turn to Keller and I don't know. It also comes down to like, who does, you know, Hiram want to put in that position. Because I also thought it was kind of interesting that Veronica kind of points it out, like he's playing up this mob thing even more, because he's got the fur coat, got his goons behind him and everything. He's standing up so straight and tall. It's almost like you're not even bothering to hide it anymore because you are in such a position. That's also another thing I meant to bring up earlier too. It's like, what did Hiram do and accomplish in that 5 weeks? Because he kept the quarantine up that entire time, because he had the power in the pool to make it last as long as he wanted to. So if it's up now, that means he got what he needed. So what did he do in that time frame? Like, obviously, maybe it gave him enough time to kind of push the production of the Fizzle Rocks up, to kind of push it out there, to kind of get the operation jump started, maybe get stuff on the prison jump started, not just the drugs, but the building of the prison and stuff like that. We'll see. You know, I'm sure there's a lot more at play here, because you never know what's fully stocked in Hiram's deck of cards, you know. So an interesting development that came about this episode is also the whole Veronica and Reggie thing. I'm not too surprised that came up, because like you could just feel it more and more, especially this episode. You can really tell like the way Reggie was kind of looking at Veronica, saying like, just however, has anyone ever told you how much of a badass you are and everything, that he was really kind of getting into her, and it seems like it's reciprocated. The question then becomes, it's like, is this Veronica moving on? Is this a rebound type of situation? Because you couldn't understand, because first, she doesn't know. For one, Archie left without really talking to her about it. He got on the phone and everything, sure, but they didn't sit down and talk about it. He just made that choice without her. Two, she doesn't know if he's ever going to come back, and you know, and if Archie does come back, things are going to be different with him and Veronica. But the great thing is, like, it won't just be this whole Reggie and Veronica thing, but it's also going to be like, will Archie even be the same person when he comes back? Like, obviously, I'll talk about his stuff soon enough, but I'm sure that's going to add a complicated situation to it, because I'm sure Archie was hoping maybe on some level he comes back to Riverdale, everything's the same, but it's like, you know, life moved on without you being there, just like him being locked up, you know. It's almost interesting, because it's like he got out of a prison just to kind of find himself wound back up in another prison, you know. Yeah, this prison doesn't have visible walls, but it's a prison nonetheless, a prison of isolation, you know. So, but it's definitely going to be interesting going forward. We did see Veronica singing, but I'm assuming Josie is still going to work there too, because she was like, once everything's settled between you and your dad, you know. But I mean, to be fair, it's not settled. They're still going to war, but they have protection now. But I still don't know if that's going to be enough for Josie, because we didn't see her like the rest of the episode, so it's hard to say whether or not she's still sticking around or not. Just because, you know, Veronica was the one that sung, so she probably took over till they found someone new, because, you know, Josie's always going to be potentially in the like line of fire, you know, because things are not slowing down between Veronica and Hiram, you know, in this regard. So their war is just going to keep sparking up, and there's going to be a lot of bloodshed, you know, maybe actually, and maybe just metaphorically, when it comes to all this, but things aren't going to be nice and neat. It's going to get messy, essentially, you know. Going back to the whole Betty situation, once again, when everything seemed like it was working and leaning in the right direction, there's that dude who brought up the whole, like, I saw the Gargoyle King, you didn't really get rid of him, and, like, you know, Betty started slowly but surely losing her sway, especially when Polly and Evelyn showed up and they were like, oh, the fact of the matter is you don't know what's actually going on. We found out who sold the Fizzle Rock because you're a serpent and they were scared to talk to you about it. You might be their Griffin Queen, but you don't really, you know, heavy is a crown that, you know, the king or queen bears, you know, in this regard. That's why it's even more interesting to make up the comparison between, because both are kind of struggling with their respective kingdoms. Hers with all the people the kids she saved from the Sisters of Quiet Mercy, and him, Jughead, with the serpents and everything. But when she was able to, you know, like I said, feel like she was in the winning corner, by the time she gets back, Edgar's already gathered up the kids. Part of me was wondering, like, was that part of the plan? I felt like that dude might have been a plant. He might have already been, like, swayed a little bit to kind of go in line, because it's interesting, because it's like, they just happen to track you down and beat you up. That's why I was kind of like, I don't know, like, because aren't you there most of the time? So how did they track you down to beat you up? That's why I kind of felt like that was kind of part of the plan or something. Like he was a plant, you know, maybe Hiram got to him or whatever. Or maybe he really did run into like the gargoyles or, you know, the Gargoyle King as well as the gang or whatever. I don't know. And like I said, one step forward and just two steps back, because now they're at the farm, which obviously we still have yet to actually see. But I'm assuming at some point Betty's going to go there to investigate, because her mom is so wound up. And it's just like, oh, you just missed about a couple minutes and she's so okay with it. You didn't give her a chance. She literally went to Fred, you know, Nana Rose, Cheryl, and McCoy about taking in some of the kids. And they agreed. And she was going to put them in the well. But, you know, Alice being kind of in a trance that she is about this whole thing. It's like, no, the farm's a great place. And, you know, that whole thing. Because it's like, oh, I called Edgar for advice. And it's just kind of like, it's so interesting. I mean, I guess the point is, like, everything that she's been through, of course, she's going to be easy pickings for kind of a cult to kind of, like, suck in. Because it's just kind of like, because it's like, Alice being kind of as strong-willed, as stubborn as she is, that's why it kind of feels so hard to believe that she'd be so swayed. But just, I mean, to be fair, everything that kind of got brought up last season, how everything that went down, with Chick. Like, it's a lot. So it's understandable, like, they came to her when she was at her most vulnerable, you know, so. But also in this episode, we deal with Archie, you know, obviously dealing with his isolation and stuff. Ended up getting attacked by a bear. That sucks ass. But then he starts hallucinating. He's seeing all the kids, you know, Cassidy, as well as the others who were there, you know, trying to rob them when they were on their little getaway. And they're kind of being like, oh, the fact is you're seeing us. That must mean that you're guilty for what happened to us. And they start putting him through trials. The first one was about confronting the Black Mask. And then, you know, the warden shows up. And it's like, oh, like, you know, because this is all about leading him to the path to get back to Riverdale. Then he had to, it said, kill the Gargoyle King. I was like, look again. And it says, kill the Man in Black. And then he ended up killing Hiram. I wasn't actually sure he'd actually do it, but he stabbed Hiram. And then it turns into the whole thing of the final thing, I guess, is to kill himself. Basically, the version of himself that he was killing, I guess, was that good-natured side of him, that naive side of him that got corrupted. Because he's like, even before, you know, Hiram and the Black Hood, this version of me got me into this naive, good-hearted me. So, like, for him, it's like, if I want to survive everything that's to come, if I ever want to go back home, I have to get rid of this weakness inside of me, like, kind of, because that side of him is the one that got swept up in the darkness after, you know, the Black Hood, and that's the side of him that got swayed by Hiram, you know, and it's like, he has to kill that side of himself, but it's like, you don't have to. It's like, it's almost kind of like he's denying that side of himself, but it's kind of like you need to embrace it if you ever want to. That there's not just one path, there are multiple paths. You just have to choose to go down them. Like, you know, you can find another way back to Riverdale, but he's like, there's something I have to do first. And I'm curious, is that something else potentially killing Hiram or not? Because all of it, it all trails back to, like, his inner demons and, like, where did it all go wrong? Was it with the Black Hood? Was it with Hiram? No, what in his mind, what went wrong was with himself. Because for him, because he blames himself, because it's like everyone that's around him gets hurt because of him. He's the problem. And it's like, unless I kill this side of myself and become change and turn into someone different, it's going to get worse. So I have to let go of this, I have to kill this version of myself, you know, to not longer be weak and be strong. But it's like, it's definitely going to be interesting to see what goes on with that, especially the way the episode ends, where we see Archie in a state and he seems unresponsive. I guess it's just kind of, he almost, I guess, went into shock because of everything. So obviously it was, without a doubt, all in his head, you could tell. But I'm curious to see what that all means going forward. Like, next time when we pick up with Archie, will he still be kind of on his kind of quest, and will it lead him back to being who he needs to be? Like, you know, because Archie has not been, like, he struggled. Like, he has not been back to being that boy from season 1 ever again. Like, because so much has happened to kind of sway and pull him towards the darkness. And even when he tries to pull away, it always seems to find a way to drag him back, especially everything that goes with Hiram, because it feels like he has to embrace the darkness or he'll never, you know, because even going as far as being like, I should have killed Hiram when I had the chance. And like I said, even in his head doing it. And it's like, well, if you do that, there is no going back. Like, everything will change for you. Like, even with Veronica, there'll be no going back and undoing that. That's something you're always going to carry. So, like I said, I'm curious to see what ends up happening when we cut back to Archie. I mean, not just him, with everything that's going down in Riverdale, with the Serpents, with Veronica, you know, especially with their new alliance, what Cheryl and Tony are going to be up to now that they're out of the Serpents, which is kind of interesting. And even Tony brought it up. It's like, the Serpents is blood to her. You know, she's more ingrained in this than, you know, anybody else. You know, I'm sure she's been a part of that world even longer than Jughead has, even though with his dad's situation, it's still kind of like, I'm here, I've been here, but now it's like, well, what did they do? And, you know, that probably going to create some animosity. I doubt Cheryl and Tony would join up with Hiram, but more so, I feel like that's a complicated situation that Hiram could pick at if he wanted to. So, like I said, we'll see in the long run where all of this takes us, especially with Betty. I'm curious to see, will she try and reach out to the farm to check on the kids? Like, that might be how she gets to the farm in the first place, to check out and see, like, oh, is it really a safe place for the kids? In that short amount of time, maybe they're completely different, because they're not in a proper mindset either, because after everything they've been through, still nightmares about the Gargoyle King and everything, like psychologically being damaged the way they are, you know, being abused, not just psychologically, but also physically, kind of puts them in a position like Alice where they're easily to pry, because even Polly wasn't in the best condition when she went to the farm, hence why she was so in a position for them to make her very valuable, essentially. So I'm very interested to see where all of this takes us going into the next episode. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Until the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.